wife called me and said I want a divorce. She told me I could only speak to her lawyer, so I went to meet her lawyer. When I said, "Yes, I'm the husband," the lawyer started shaking. You know how they say your life can change in an instant? Yeah, well, whoever they are clearly had a front row seat to my Tuesday afternoon disaster show. There I was, sitting in my cramped office that smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams, squinting at shipping contracts that made about as much sense as a calculus equation written in ancient Sanskrit. The fluorescent light above me flickered like it was having some kind of existential crisis, which looking back was pretty fitting considering what was about to go down. My desk was buried under a mountain of paperwork that would make Mount Everest jealous. Import regulations, customs forms, and enough red tape to gift-wrap the entire state of Texas. I've been running my logistics company for 8 years now, turning what started as a one-man operation with a beat-up truck into something that actually paid the bills and then some. Not bad for a guy who used to change oil for a living, right? The phone rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. I know because I was staring at the clock wondering if it was socially acceptable to start drinking before 5 p.m. On a Tuesday, the caller ID showed Isabella Hartsuit. Yeah, I still had the heart emoji. Sue me. My wife of 13 years calling during her usual yoga and wine tasting time. Weird, but maybe she wanted to grab dinner somewhere fancy again. Isabella had expensive taste, which was fine by me since business was good. Hey babe, I answered, already planning whether we'd hit that new steakhouse downtown or stick with our usual Italian joint. What's up? Silence. Not the comfortable kind where she's deciding between two equally ridiculous reality TV shows, but the kind that makes your gut clench like you just realized you forgot to file your taxes again. Marcus. Her voice hit me like a slap from a frozen fish. Cold, calculated, and about as warm as a polar bear's armpit. No, honey. No, sweetheart. Just my name delivered like she was reading it off a court document. This isn't working anymore. 7 words. 7 little words that apparently had the power to detonate my entire existence like some kind of verbal nuclear bomb. I actually laughed. One of those nervous, what the hell is happening kind of laughs that probably made me sound like a hyena with anxiety issues. What isn't working? The dishwasher? Because I told you I'd call the repair guy. Our marriage, Marcus. She cut me off cleaner than a samurai sword through butter. I want a divorce. The world went quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but that eerie silence you get right before a tornado rips your house apart and deposits it 3 counties over. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, loud as a marching band having a nervous breakdown. You'll be hearing from my lawyer from now on. Don't try to contact me directly. And just like that, she hung up. 13 years of marriage. 13 years of good mornings and good nights. 13 years of building a life together. And she ended it with less ceremony than ordering a pizza. Hell, I've had longer conversations with telemarketers trying to sell me extended car warranties. I sat there, holding the phone like it might suddenly explain what the hell just happened. The shipping contracts stared back at me mockingly, as if they knew my personal life had just imploded while I was worried about cargo containers and delivery schedules. Real priorities, Marcus. Real smooth. My brain started doing that thing where it replays conversations, looking for clues I might have missed. Had she seemed distant lately? Yeah, maybe. But Isabella was always a little distant. It was part of her charm. Like dating an elegant ice sculpture that occasionally remembered to smile. Had we been fighting? Not really. We'd had the usual married couple stuff, whose turn it was to take out the trash, why I left my socks on the bedroom floor, whether we really needed to attend her friend's third wedding to the same guy. Nothing that screamed, I'm about to nuke our entire relationship via phone call. The office door creaked open and Leo's head popped in like a concerned prairie dog. Leo was my assistant, a 20-something kid with enough nervous energy to power a small city and the uncanny ability to sense workplace drama from 3 floors away. Boss, you okay in here? You look like you just saw a ghost and that ghost told you your favorite restaurant closed down forever. I must have looked pretty pathetic because Leo actually stepped all the way into the office, which he usually avoided like it contained some kind of contagious paperwork disease. Yeah, Leo, I'm fine. The lie tasted bitter as expired milk. Just family stuff. He nodded like he understood, but his eyes said he clearly didn't buy my performance. Smart kid. Want me to reschedule your 4 o'clock with Henderson Shipping? Yeah, do that. I needed to think, and I definitely wasn't in any condition to negotiate freight rates with Henderson's notorious penny-pinching crew. After Leo left, I tried calling Isabella back straight to voicemail. Her voice, still warm and familiar on the recording, felt like a cruel joke. Hi, you've reached Isabella. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you. Except she wouldn't. Not anymore. That evening I drove home to our apartment in Brooklyn. Correction, my apartment now, apparently. The elevator ride up to the 8th floor felt longer than usual, like time itself was moving through molasses mixed with dread. I opened the front door and immediately knew something was wrong. The air felt different, emptier somehow. Her keys weren't on the kitchen counter where she always tossed them with dramatic flair. Her purse wasn't dumped on the couch, spilling makeup and receipts like some kind of feminine explosion. I walked through our place, my place, like a detective investigating a crime scene where the only victim was my sanity. Her side of the closet, empty hangers swaying like tiny gallows. The bathroom counter. No perfume bottles, no makeup brushes scattered around like she was running some kind of beauty supply operation out of our home. She'd cleaned out everything that mattered to her and left everything that didn't, which apparently included me. The worst part, she'd been planning this. You don't empty an entire life's worth of belongings in an afternoon. This was a military operation, executed with the precision of someone who'd been plotting their escape while I was busy being a husband. I poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey, the good stuff Isabella had bought me for my birthday last month. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was drinking her gift while processing her abandonment. Life's funny that way, if your sense of humor runs toward the sadistic. Sitting in our living room, surrounded by the ghost of our shared life, I realized something that hit harder than the divorce bomb itself. I wasn't even surprised. Not really. Somewhere deep down in that part of your brain that notices things your conscious mind refuses to acknowledge, I'd seen this coming. The late nights at the office, the phone calls she'd take in the other room, the way she'd started dressing nicer for random Tuesday errands, the subtle but growing distance, like she was slowly turning down the volume on our relationship until it was just background noise. I'd ignored it all because it was easier than asking questions I didn't want answered. Now, sitting alone in what used to be our home, I had all the answers I never wanted, and none of the explanations I actually needed. Isabella was gone, taking 13 years of my life with her. And somehow, I was supposed to figure out how to be just Marcus again instead of Marcus and Isabella. The phone sat silent on the coffee table, and for the first time in hours, I was grateful for the quiet. Morning came way too early, like it always does when you've spent the night staring at the ceiling, wondering how your life went from sitcom to horror movie without changing the channel. I had maybe caught 2 hours of sleep and That was being generous. My brain had been running laps around every conversation, every moment, every damn smile Isabella had given me over the past few months, trying to figure out when exactly I'd become the punchline to a joke I didn't even know was being told. Coffee first. Coffee always first. That's rule number one of surviving any crisis. Whether it's a busted shipment or your wife deciding you're about as useful as a chocolate teapot. I stumbled to the kitchen, moving like a zombie who'd forgotten how his own limbs worked, and started the coffee maker. The sound of it brewing was probably the most normal thing that had happened in the last 12 hours. While waiting for my liquid sanity to finish dripping, I figured I should probably check our finances. You know, like a responsible adult who definitely wasn't falling apart at the seams. I grabbed my laptop and logged into our joint checking account, fully expecting to see the usual suspects. Grocery store charges, gas stations, maybe that ridiculously overpriced organic market Isabella loved because apparently regular food wasn't good enough for her refined palate. What I found instead made my coffee taste like it had been filtered through a gym sock. Withdrawals. Lots of them. Big ones. The Ritz-Carlton, Boston, $847 last Friday night. Funny thing about that, I was home watching Netflix and eating leftover Chinese takeout last Friday night. Either Isabella had developed the ability to be in two places at once, or she'd been playing house with someone else while I was binge-watching documentaries about serial killers. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tiffany & Company, $3,200. 2 weeks ago, I definitely didn't buy her any jewelry, and her birthday wasn't until October. Unless there was some holiday I'd missed, like National Cheat on Your Husband Day. This was looking pretty damn suspicious. Morton Steakhouse, $394. Multiple charges over the past month. Always for 2 people. Always when I was supposedly working late or out of town. Except I hadn't been out of town in 3 months. And my idea of working late involved pizza delivery and spreadsheets, not fancy steakhouse that charged more for a meal than most people made in a day. The more I scrolled, the sicker I felt. It was like watching a movie about my own life, except I wasn't the leading man. I was the clueless husband who gets killed off in the first act, so the real story can begin. Date nights I never went on, hotel rooms I never slept in, jewelry I never bought. My wife had been living a whole separate existence, and I'd been funding it like some kind of unwitting sugar daddy to my own betrayal. But here's where it gets really fun. Our joint investment account, the one we've been building for our future together, showed some interesting activity too. Large transfers, not the kind you make when you're buying a new couch or splurging on a vacation. The kind you make when you're moving money around like you're planning something big, something permanent. $25,000 transferred to her personal account 3 weeks ago. Another $15,000 last Tuesday. She'd been systematically draining our shared funds while I was busy being a devoted husband. It was like discovering your business partner had been embezzling, except instead of just stealing money, she'd been stealing my entire future and laughing about it over expensive dinners. I printed everything, every receipt, every transaction, every piece of evidence that painted a picture clearer than a 4K television. My wife wasn't just leaving me. She'd been methodically dismantling our marriage while I was too busy being in love to notice the demolition crew at work. My phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made my blood pressure spike like a rocket ship. Meeting request. Kessler and Associates. Harold Kessler. Even people who didn't know lawyers knew that name. He was like the final boss of Boston's legal scene, the guy you called when you wanted to crush your enemies and hear the lamentations of their accountants. Corporate law was his playground, and he built a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in contract negotiations. Companies paid him stupid money to make their problems disappear and their competitors cry. But family law, that was weird. Kessler was a corporate shark who usually swam in much deeper, more profitable waters. Getting him for a divorce was like hiring a Formula One driver to help you parallel park. It could be done, but it was massive overkill unless you were planning to do some serious damage. The meeting request was for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Professional, polite, and probably expensive enough to fund a small nation's military budget. Isabella wasn't just trying to divorce me. She was bringing out the big guns. She wanted to intimidate me, make me feel small and outgunned before we even started talking terms. I had to give her credit for the strategy. Most guys would see Kessler's name and immediately start thinking about settling quickly to avoid getting steamrolled by a legal legend. Most guys would probably show up sweating bullets and ready to sign whatever papers got shoved in front of them. Too bad for Isabella. I wasn't most guys. See, here's something my dear wife apparently forgot during her little scorched earth campaign. I'd been running a business for 8 years. A successful business that required dealing with contracts, negotiations, and more than a few people who thought they could push me around because I used to have grease under my fingernails. I'd learned to read between the lines, spot the traps, and most importantly, how to stay calm when someone was trying to screw me over. And Harold Kessler? We'd actually met before 2 years ago during the Meridian container dispute that nearly cost me everything. He'd been representing the company trying to break a contract that would have bankrupted me. Smart guy, tough negotiator, but he had one weakness. He got cocky when he thought he was dealing with small fish. I'd beaten him then by finding a clause buried so deep in the contract that his team had missed it completely. Turned a potential disaster into a victory that kept my business afloat, and taught me never to underestimate the power of actually reading the fine print. Now Isabella was sending him after me again, probably thinking I'd fold like a cheap lawn chair in a hurricane. She'd always underestimated me, treating me like the lucky mechanic who'd married up instead of the man who'd built something from nothing, while she spent her trust fund on yoga classes and artisanal everything. I leaned back in my chair and actually smiled for the first time since yesterday's phone call. Tomorrow's meeting was going to be interesting. Isabella thought she was playing chess while I was stuck playing checkers. She was about to find out that I'd been studying the board a lot longer than she realized. I closed the laptop and finished my coffee, which had gone cold while I was uncovering my wife's secret life as a financial ninja. The apartment felt different now. Not like home, but like a crime scene where the only thing murdered was my trust. But you know what? Maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Sometimes you need everything to fall apart before you can see how fake it all was in the first place. The law offices of Kessler and Associates sat on the 32nd floor of a downtown Boston high-rise that probably cost more to build than my entire net worth. Walking into that marble and mahogany monument to legal intimidation was like stepping into a museum dedicated to making people feel small and poor. The elevator ride up felt longer than a cross-country flight. And I'm pretty sure they pumped classical music through the speakers, just to remind visitors that they were about to get their asses handed to them by people who appreciated the finer things in life. I dressed for war. My best suit, the charcoal gray one Isabella had picked out for me last Christmas because apparently even my clothes needed her approval back then. Italian leather shoes that cost more than my first car, and a tie that screamed, "I'm not some broke mechanic you can push around anymore." If Kessler wanted to play the intimidation game, I was going to show up looking like I belonged in his overpriced boys' club. The receptionist was exactly what you'd expect from a place like this. Blonde, polished, and trained to smile like she genuinely cared about your legal problems, while secretly calculating how much money you were about to lose. Her desk probably cost more than most people's cars, and it was so shiny I could see my reflection in it. Mr. Hale. She looked me up and down like she was trying to figure out if I was actually supposed to be there or if I'd wandered in from the janitorial staff. Mr. Kessler is ready for you. The walk down the hallway felt like a death march. Every step on that ridiculously expensive carpet was another step toward whatever legal nightmare Isabella had cooked up for me. The walls were lined with awards, diplomas, and photos of Kessler shaking hands with politicians, CEOs, and probably the Pope. For all I knew, this guy collected victories like some people collected baseball cards. Kessler's corner office was the size of a small apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of Boston Harbor that probably added 6 figures to the rent. The man himself sat behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single tree by monks who'd taken a vow of perfectionism. Everything about the room screamed power, money, and the kind of confidence that comes from never losing a fight that mattered. Harold Kessler looked exactly like Central Casting would order for intimidating lawyer number 1. Silver hair, perfectly styled, expensive suit that fit like it had been tailored by angels, and the kind of confident posture that said he'd eaten smaller men than me for breakfast and still had room for lunch. He stood up when I walked in, extending his hand with the practice smile of someone who'd perfected the art of looking friendly while planning your destruction. Mr. Hale, please, have a seat. I took his hand and squeezed just a little harder than necessary. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to let him know I wasn't here to roll over and play dead. His handshake was firm, confident, the grip of a man who'd never doubted his ability to win. Thank you for coming in on such short notice, he continued, settling back into his leather throne. I know this must be a difficult time for you. I've had better weeks, I replied, keeping my voice level. No point in showing him how much this was eating me alive. Lawyers were like sharks. They could smell blood in the water from miles away. He opened a thick folder on his desk, and I caught a glimpse of Isabella's name written in neat, professional handwriting across the tab. My entire marriage, reduced to a manila folder. How romantic. Now, Mr. Hale. He stopped mid-sentence and looked at me more carefully, like he was trying to place my face. His confident expression flickered for just a second, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like recognition, mixed with indigestion. I'm sorry. Have we met before? You look familiar. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I leaned back in my chair and gave him my most innocent smile, the one I used to reserve for traffic cops and IRS auditors. Marcus Hale, Hill Logistics. We tangled about 2 years ago over the Meridian container situation. The color drained from his face faster than water down a broken drain. I watched him remember exactly who I was and, more importantly, how that particular legal battle had ended. For him, it had been a rare and very expensive loss. For me, it had been the difference between bankruptcy and building something worth fighting for. His hands, those steady, confident lawyer hands, started trembling just slightly as he reached for the folder again. It was subtle, but I'd spent enough time in negotiations to recognize when someone realized they were playing a game, they might not win. Oh, he cleared his throat like he was trying to swallow his own surprise. Yes, I remember now. The hidden arbitration clause in Section 47 of the shipping agreement. The one your team missed during discovery. I added helpfully, because I'm nothing if not considerate when it comes to reminding people of their failures. The silence stretched between us like a rubber band about to snap. Kessler was clearly recalculating every assumption he'd made about this meeting. When Isabella had walked into his office, she'd probably painted me as some blue-collar pushover who'd be grateful for whatever crumbs they threw my way. She'd probably told him I was just a simple businessman who wouldn't know a legal strategy from a hole in the ground. What she hadn't mentioned was that I was the simple businessman who'd outmaneuvered one of Boston's most feared corporate attorneys using nothing but patience, preparation, and the kind of attention to detail that comes from growing up poor and learning that everything can disappear if you're not careful. "She didn't tell you who I was, did she?" I asked, keeping my voice conversational like we were discussing the weather instead of the impending legal apocalypse. Kessler's Adam's apple bobbed like a fishing lure. "Mrs. Hale mentioned you were in the shipping business. She didn't elaborate on the specifics of your background." Translation: Isabella had set him up to fight a war without telling him what kind of enemy he was facing. Classic Isabella move. Actually, she'd always been great at getting other people to fight her battles while keeping the important details to herself. "Well," I said, standing up and smoothing down my tie. "This should be fun then." I could practically see the wheels turning in his head. He was probably wondering if he could gracefully back out of representing Isabella without looking like a complete amateur. The great Harold Kessler, scared off by a guy who used to change oil for a living. His reputation was going to love that story making the rounds at the country club. "Mr. Hale," he started, his voice carefully controlled. "Perhaps we should discuss the possibility of a more collaborative approach to these proceedings." Collaborative? That was lawyer speak for "please don't embarrass me in court the way you did last time." I almost felt sorry for the guy. Almost. "I'm sure we can work something out," I replied, heading toward the door. "Have Isabella call me when she's ready to have an actual conversation instead of hiding behind expensive suits." I paused at the door and turned back, giving him my best customer service smile. "Oh, and Harold, next time someone hires you to intimidate their husband, maybe ask for a little more background information first. Saves everyone the awkwardness." Walking out of that office felt better than winning the lottery. The elevator ride down was completely different from the trip up. Instead of dread, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Isabella's phone call. Control. For the first time since my world had exploded, I wasn't just reacting to someone else's moves. I was making my own. The receptionist watched me leave with obvious confusion. Meetings with Harold Kessler usually ended with people looking like they'd been hit by a truck carrying bad news. I probably looked like I'd just won a prize at the county fair. Outside, Boston was doing its usual thing. Honking horns, rushing pedestrians, and street vendors selling hot dogs that smelled better than they probably tasted. Normal life, continuing, while mine got turned upside down and shaken like a snow globe. But for the first time since yesterday, I felt like I might actually land on my feet when everything settled. Isabella had made her first mistake. She tried to scare me with a lawyer who knew exactly what I was capable of. She brought a gun to a knife fight, except she'd forgotten that I'd already proven I could take that particular gun apart and use the pieces to build something better. I pulled out my phone and called Leo. "Boss, how'd the lawyer thing go? Scale of 1 to 10, how screwed are we?" "Change of plans, Leo. Cancel everything for the rest of the week. I've got some research to do." "Research? What kind of research? Please tell me it doesn't involve more paperwork. I'm already drowning in shipping manifests." I looked up at Kessler's building, watching people in expensive suits rushing around like ants in a very costly anthill. The kind that's going to make this whole mess a lot more interesting. Isabella thought she'd planned the perfect escape. She'd moved her stuff out, hired a killer lawyer, and probably expected me to sign whatever divorce papers landed on my desk without reading them. She'd underestimated me before, and apparently getting married hadn't cured her of that particular blind spot. Time to remind her why that was a mistake. Getting home from Kessler's office felt like returning from a successful battle, but I knew the war was just getting started. Isabella might have stumbled out of the gate with her choice of legal representation, But she wasn't stupid. Manipulative, sure. Calculating as a chess grandmaster with daddy issues, absolutely. But not stupid. She'd regroup, probably fire Kessler's ass, and come back swinging with someone who didn't have a history of me making them look like amateur hour. Which meant I needed to dig deeper into my arsenal before she figured out how to play this game properly. I headed straight for the safe in our bedroom. My bedroom now, I guess. The thing was hidden behind a painting of some abstract nonsense that Isabella had insisted was art, but looked more like someone had sneezed paint onto a canvas and charged $5,000 for the privilege. The safe itself was Isabella's idea too, because apparently we needed Fort Knox-level security for our important documents in case burglars broke in specifically looking for insurance papers and birth certificates. The combination was our wedding date, because Isabella was nothing if not sentimental about the things that mattered to her. July 15th, 2011. The day I'd promised to love, honor, and apparently fund her secret double life until death or devastating phone calls did us part. Inside the safe was the usual collection of adult responsibilities: passports, insurance policies, the deed to the apartment, and there, sitting at the bottom like it had been waiting for this exact moment, our prenuptial agreement. That goddamn prenup that had caused more arguments than every other fight in our marriage combined. I pulled it out and stared at the cover page. Marital agreement between Marcus William Hale and Isabella Catherine Thornton. Even seeing her maiden name in print felt like a punch to the gut. She'd gone back to being a Thornton the second she decided I wasn't worth keeping around. The whole prenup thing had been Isabella's brilliant idea back when we got engaged. I was 24, working as a mechanic at Tony's garage, and making just enough money to keep my rent control department and my 15-year-old Honda running. She was Isabella Thornton, daughter of some investment banker who thought regular people were a charming curiosity he occasionally encountered at charity events. "It's just to protect my family's assets," she'd said. All sweet smiles and reasonable explanations. "You understand, right? My father insists on it. It's nothing personal." Nothing personal, right? Like asking your future husband to sign a document, assuming he might try to rob you blind. Wasn't personal at all. But I was young, stupid in love, and figured if signing some papers was the price of marrying the most beautiful woman who'd ever given me the time of day, then hell, where did I sign? What Isabella and her fancy lawyer father didn't realize was that I actually read the thing cover to cover twice. Most guys would have just scrolled their signature wherever someone pointed and called it a day. But growing up poor teaches you that the devil's always in the details. And those details are usually designed to screw you over. The prenup was pretty standard rich person stuff for the most part. Her family money stayed her family money. Any businesses or property we acquired during the marriage would be split according to contribution and effort. Boring legal language that basically said what's mine is mine and what's yours is negotiable. But then there was Section 12, subsection C, the infidelity clause. I remembered laughing when I first read it. Isabella had insisted on including a clause that would severely penalize whichever spouse cheated on the other. Her reasoning: "You're too handsome to be trusted, Marcus, and I've seen how women look at you when you work on their cars. I need protection." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife and serve it for dinner. According to the clause, if either spouse committed adultery during the marriage, the faithful spouse would receive half of all business assets and investments acquired during the union, plus a significant financial penalty that would make the cheating party think twice about their life choices. Isabella had wanted it written in stone because she was convinced I'd be the one to screw up. She'd insisted on making the penalties harsh enough to make sure we both stay honest. Her words, not mine. Apparently, she'd been planning to corner the market on dishonesty all along. I sat on the edge of the bed reading through the legalese that now felt like a treasure map leading to Isabella's downfall. The woman who demanded this clause to protect herself from my supposed wandering. I had just handed me the nuclear option in our divorce proceedings. It was like she'd built me a weapon and then decided to test its effectiveness by pointing it at herself. The business assets part was particularly delicious. When we'd gotten married, I had nothing except dreams and a decent work ethic. Now, Hill Logistics was worth serious money. We'd grown from a one-man operation to a company with 12 employees, a fleet of trucks, and contracts with some of the biggest importers on the East Coast. The apartment was worth $500,000 easy, and our investment portfolio had grown to something that would make Isabella's trust fund look like lunch money. All of it acquired during our marriage, all of it covered by the prenup's infidelity clause, all of it about to become very expensive for my cheating wife. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of every relevant page. The legal language was dense as concrete, but the basic message was crystal clear. Whoever broke their marriage vows was about to get financially destroyed, and whoever stayed faithful was about to get very, very rich. Isabella had spent months planning her exit strategy, moving money around, hiring expensive lawyers, and setting up her new life with Brandon, whoever the hell it was. But in all her careful planning, she'd apparently forgotten about the legal landmine she'd insisted on burying in our marriage contract. The beautiful thing about prenups is that they're designed to be unbreakable. Isabella's father had made sure of that when his high-priced legal team drafted this thing. Ironclad clauses, bulletproof language, and enough redundancy to survive any challenge. They built it to protect the Thornton family fortune from gold-digging husbands. Instead, they built me a fortress. I couldn't help but laugh. Actually laugh out loud like some kind of maniac sitting alone in his bedroom holding legal documents. The sound echoed off the walls of the apartment where Isabella used to live, where she used to plan our future together while secretly planning her escape from it. She'd always been too clever for her own good. In her rush to protect herself from a betrayal that never came, she'd guaranteed that her own betrayal would cost her everything. It was like watching someone install a home security system and then accidentally trigger it while trying to rob their own house. My phone buzzed with a text from Leo. Boss Henderson Shipping called 3 times. They want to reschedule. Also, your wife's lawyer called, says it's urgent. I texted back. Tell Henderson next week. Tell Kessler I'll call him when I'm ready. For the first time since Isabella's phone call had blown up my world, I felt like I was holding cards instead of just hoping the dealer was feeling generous. She wanted to play hardball. Fine. She wanted to hire expensive lawyers and try to intimidate me into submission. Bring it on. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail in her master plan. I wasn't the broke, grateful mechanic she'd married anymore. I was the guy who'd built something from nothing while she was spending her afternoons at yoga class and wine tastings. I was the guy who'd learned to read contracts and spot traps and fight for what was mine. And now, thanks to her own paranoid insistence on that infidelity clause, everything we'd built together was about to become just mine. I carefully placed the prenup back in the safe, but not before making copies of the important sections. Isabella thought she was playing chess while I was stuck with checkers. Turns out she'd just handed me the queen. Finding evidence of your wife's affair is like looking for your car keys. Once you know where to look, you realize they've been sitting in plain sight the whole damn time. I didn't need to hire some private investigator with a fedora and trust issues. Isabella had left a trail of breadcrumbs that would make Hansel and Gretel jealous, except instead of leading to a gingerbread house. This path led straight to the confirmation that my marriage had been a bigger lie than politicians' campaign promises. Her credit card statements were like reading a romance novel written by someone with expensive taste and zero creativity. The same restaurants over and over, always charged for 2 people, always during times when I was supposedly the worst husband in America for working late or being out of town on business. Except here's the kicker. I keep detailed calendars because running a logistics company means knowing where everything is at all times, including yourself. Cross-referencing her dinner dates with my actual schedule was like solving a puzzle designed by someone who thought I was too stupid to notice the pieces didn't fit. February 14th, Valentine's Day, Morton Steakhouse, $428 for 2. According to my calendar, I was home that night wondering why my wife suddenly had a headache and wanted to just order pizza and watch Netflix. Romantic. March 8th, another hotel charge, this time at the Mandarin Oriental, $1,200 for one night. I was in Providence that day meeting with a new client about expanding our shipping routes. Isabella had said she was having a girls' night with her sister. Apparently, girls' night was code for expensive hotel sex with someone who isn't my husband. The pattern was so obvious it was almost insulting. Did she really think I was that oblivious? Or maybe she just didn't care if I found out because she was planning to blow up our marriage anyway. Either way, it painted a pretty clear picture of a woman who'd been living a double life while I was busy being faithful, like some kind of marriage Boy Scout. But the real smoking gun was hidden in her nightstand drawer, tucked behind a bottle of prescription sleep aids she claimed she needed because of stress. A second phone. A Bish burner phone, like she was running drugs instead of running around on her husband. I powered it up and the thing lit up like a Christmas tree with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails, all from the same contact. B. Red Heart. How original. I guess when you're conducting an affair, creativity takes a back seat to convenience. The message is read like a greatest hits collection of infidelity cliches. Can't wait to see you tonight. Marcus is working late again. Perfect timing. Booked our usual room. It was like reading a script for a bad daytime soap opera, except the cheating wife was my cheating wife, and the oblivious husband getting screwed over was yours truly. But the most interesting messages were the recent ones. He's going to be so easy to handle in the divorce. My lawyer says guys like Marcus always fold when they realize how expensive fighting can get. By the time this is over, he'll be grateful for whatever we leave him. Guys like Marcus. That phrase stuck in my brain like a splinter. What exactly did that mean? Blue collar guys, poor kids who married up. Men who were supposed to be grateful for the privilege of being married to Isabella Thornon, and should therefore accept whatever scraps she decided to throw their way. The voicemails were even better. I listened to this Brandon character's voice for the first time, and he sounded exactly like I'd expected. Smooth, confident, and dumber than a box of rocks. The kind of guy who probably thought entrepreneur was pronounced entree manure, and used words like synergy in casual conversation. Baby, can't wait to celebrate tomorrow night. One message said, Kessler's going to eat that husband of yours alive. By this time next month, we'll be planning our trip to Tuscany. Tuscany with my money, no doubt. But here's where it gets interesting. Brandon's last name was Morrison, and a quick Google search revealed that Brandon Morrison was a restaurant investor who specialized in high-end establishments throughout New England. The same Brandon Morrison who'd been at the hospital charity gala last year. The one where he'd been overly friendly with Isabella while I was busy networking with potential clients like a responsible adult. I remembered him now. Slick hair, expensive watch, and the kind of smile that screamed, I'm probably screwing someone's wife. He'd cornered Isabella by the bar that night, laughing too loudly at things that weren't funny, and standing just a little too close for comfort. I chalked it up to alcohol and rich guy arrogance. Turns out, I should have chalked it up to him literally trying to steal my wife. The timeline was starting to make sense. The gala was 8 months ago. Isabella's mysterious girls' nights started about 6 months ago. The expensive dinners and hotel charges began around the same time. She'd met him, decided he was an upgrade from her blue-collar husband, and started planning her exit strategy while I was busy building the business that was funding her affair. The audacity was almost impressive. She'd been using my money to date another man while planning to divorce me and take half of everything I'd worked for. It was like discovering your business partner had been embezzling funds to start a competing company. Except instead of just stealing money, she'd been stealing my entire future and laughing about it over champagne I'd paid for. I took screenshots of every message, every call log, every piece of evidence that painted the picture of my wife's secret life. The photos were particularly damning. Isabella and Brandon at restaurants I couldn't afford when I was a mechanic, wearing jewelry I'd never seen, looking at each other the way she used to look at me back when I was naive enough to think our marriage meant something. Brandon Morrison, restaurant investor, Tuscany planning, husband stealing, trust fund, waste of oxygen. I even found his business address through his investment company's website. The guy had offices in the same building where Isabella got her nails done every Thursday. Convenient. I called his office number, not because I had anything to say to him, but because I wanted to hear his voice again. Know your enemy and all that. His voicemail greeting was exactly what I'd expected. Smooth, professional, and dripping with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to actually work for anything. You've reached Brandon Morrison, principal investor at Morrison Restaurant Group. Please leave a detailed message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks, and have a great day. I hung up without leaving a message. I didn't need to talk to him. I just needed to confirm that this was the same bisshole who'd been planning my financial ruin while screwing my wife. Check and check. The evidence folder was getting thick. Credit card statements, hotel receipts, text messages, photos, and now a name and face to go with Isabella's betrayal. Brandon Morrison, the man who thought he was going to ride off into the sunset with my wife and half my money. Too bad for Brandon. He'd apparently never heard of prenuptial agreements or the concept of consequences. He was about to get a crash course in both. I spread everything out on the kitchen table like I was planning a military operation. Bank statements here, phone records there, hotel receipts arranged in chronological order, like a timeline of deception. It looked like the kind of evidence board you'd see in a crime drama, except instead of tracking a serial killer, I was tracking a serial cheater who happened to be married to me. The pattern was clear as daylight. Isabella hadn't just fallen out of love with me. She'd systematically planned her escape while building a relationship with someone she thought was a better option. The expensive dinners, the hotel stays, the jewelry purchases, even the timing of her lawyer meetings, everything calculated to maximize her financial gain while minimizing my ability to fight back. She'd underestimated two crucial things: my ability to connect dots and my tendency to actually read important documents before signing them. The prenup she'd insisted on to protect her family's money was about to become the weapon that destroyed her carefully laid plans. I poured myself another whiskey, becoming a bit of a habit, but desperate times and all that, and called Leo. Boss, please tell me you're not about to ask me to do something illegal because I watch a lot of crime shows, and I'm pretty sure I'm not cut out for prison. Nothing illegal, Leo. Just need you to clear my calendar for the rest of the week. I've got some personal business to handle. The divorce thing, man, that sucks. Isabella seemed nice. That was the problem with cheaters. They were usually pretty good at seeming nice right up until they stuck the knife between your shoulder blades. But Leo didn't need to hear about my marital disasters. The kid had enough problems dealing with shipping schedules and customs paperwork. Yeah, well, things aren't always what they seem. I said, "Hold down the fort. I'll be back Monday." I hung up and looked at my evidence collection spread across the table. Tomorrow, I was going back to see Harold Kessler. But this time, I wouldn't be walking into his office as the confused, heartbroken husband who didn't understand what was happening to him. I'd be walking in as a man with a prenup, a pile of evidence, and a very clear understanding of exactly how much this affair was going to cost my soon-to-be ex-wife. Isabella thought she'd planned the perfect crime. Turns out, she'd just planned the perfect confession. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Like when you're sitting in a downtown cafe minding your own business and trying to figure out how to legally destroy your cheating wife, and suddenly the key to everything walks up to your table looking like she's about to throw up from nerves. I'd chosen Cafe Luna because it was the kind of place where nobody bothered you. Decent coffee, free Wi-Fi, and enough background noise to drown out the sound of your life falling apart in real time. I was camped out at a corner table with my laptop pretending to work on shipping schedules while actually Googling how to prove adultery in Massachusetts like some kind of domestic detective having a midlife crisis. The research was depressing as hell. Apparently Massachusetts is a no-fault divorce state, which means proving your spouse is a cheating piece of garbage doesn't automatically guarantee you anything except the satisfaction of being right. But prenups were different. Prenups with infidelity clauses were like legal contracts written in blood. Break them, and you pay the price in cold, hard cash. I was deep in the rabbit hole of family law websites when someone cleared their throat next to my table. I looked up expecting to see a barista asking if I wanted a refill, or maybe some homeless guy looking for spare change. Instead, I found myself staring at a young woman who looked like she was about to confess to a murder she didn't commit. She was maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a nervous ponytail, and the kind of outfit that screamed, "I work in an office, but not a fancy one." Her hands were shaking slightly, and she kept glancing around the cafe like she was worried someone might be watching. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you Marcus?" Marcus Hale. Warning bells started going off in my head like a fire alarm in a fireworks factory. Random strangers knowing your name is never a good sign. Especially when your life has recently exploded into a million pieces of marital shrapnel. "Depends who's asking," I replied, closing my laptop and sizing her up. She didn't look like a process server or a private investigator, but you never know. Isabella was smart enough to hire people who didn't look like they were about to ruin your day. "I'm Chloe," she said, sliding into the chair across from me without being invited. "Chloe Martinez. I work for Brandon Morrison." Well, shit. The universe's twisted sense of humor was apparently working overtime today. "I think we need to talk," she continued, her voice getting steadier as she went on. "About your wife and my boss." I studied her face, looking for signs that this was some kind of setup. Maybe Isabella had sent her to gather information, or maybe this was part of some elaborate legal strategy one didn't understand yet. But Chloe looked genuinely nervous, like someone who was about to spill secrets that could get her fired, or worse. "What about them?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. No point in showing my cards until I knew what game we were playing. Chloe glanced around again, then leaned forward and lowered her voice. "I've been Brandon's assistant for 2 years. I handle his calendar, his phone calls, his travel arrangements. I know things. What kind of things? The kinds that would probably interest a husband whose wife has been lying to him for months. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small flash drive, placing it on the table between us like it was a live grenade. 6 months of emails, text messages, photos, hotel reservations, restaurant bookings. Everything. I stared at the flash drive like it might bite me. Why would you do this? Why would you risk your job to help some guy you've never met? Chloe's expression hardened, and for the first time since she'd sat down, she looked genuinely angry instead of just nervous, because I've been listening to them plan this for months. The way they talk about you, it's disgusting. Isabella keeps saying you're too stupid to fight back, too grateful for marrying up to cause problems. She actually said you'd probably thank her for leaving you because you'd finally realize you weren't good enough for her. The coffee in my mouth suddenly tasted like battery acid. Hearing about your wife's affair was one thing. Hearing about how she and her boyfriend had been laughing at you behind your back was something else entirely. Brandon's even worse, Chloe continued, her voice getting harder with each word. He keeps calling you the mechanic like it's some kind of insult. Says Isabella's finally trading up from blue-collar trash to someone with real money in class. They sit in his office planning how they're going to spend your money once the divorce goes through. My hands clenched into fists under the table, but I kept my voice level. And you decided to do something about it. Because I grew up poor too, she said simply. My dad was a construction worker who got screwed over by rich people who thought he was too dumb to read contracts. I've watched Brandon destroy other people's lives for sport, and I'm sick of it. When I heard how they were planning to screw you over, I decided someone needed to level the playing field. She pushed the flash drive closer to me. Everything's on there. Email conversations where they plan their dates around your business trips. Text messages where Isabella brags about how easy it's going to be to take half your assets. Photos from their little romantic getaways that you paid for without knowing it. I picked up the drive and it felt heavier than something that small had any right to feel. Like holding a stick of dynamite that could blow up what was left of my marriage, or maybe blow up Isabella's plans instead. There's something else, Chloe said, her voice dropping even lower. Last week, I heard Isabella on the phone with someone, probably her lawyer. She was laughing about how you'd probably sign whatever papers they put in front of you because you were too loyal to fight dirty. She said Brandon was right about blue-collar guys being pushovers who don't understand how rich people really operate. Blue-collar guys, pushovers too loyal to fight dirty. The anger that had been simmering in my chest since Isabella's phone call suddenly turned into something cold and calculating. She thought I was weak. She thought growing up poor had made me grateful and passive. She thought marrying her had been such a gift that I'd never dared to fight for what was mine. Isabella had always been wrong about a lot of things, but this might have been her biggest miscalculation yet. How do I know this isn't some kind of setup? I asked, because even angry men need to be careful about gifts that seem too good to be true. Chloe pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of Isabella and Brandon at what looked like an expensive restaurant. They were holding hands across the table, gazing at each other like teenagers in love, while wearing clothes that probably cost more than most people's rent. In the background, barely visible, was Chloe herself, clearly taking the photo. I took that last Tuesday, she said. The same night Isabella told you she was having dinner with her book club to discuss some novel about feminist empowerment. Ironic, considering she's about to learn what real empowerment looks like. I pocketed the flash drive and looked at this young woman who just handed me enough ammunition to win a war I hadn't even known I was fighting. Why should I trust you? Because Chloe said, standing up and slinging her purse over her shoulder, "I've spent 2 years watching Brandon treat people like disposable toys. I've seen him ruin marriages, destroy businesses, and laugh about it afterward. Your wife thinks she's special, but she's just his latest hobby. Give it 6 months after your divorce is final, and he'll be bored with her, too." She paused at the edge of the table, looking down at me with something that might have been pity or respect. "The difference is, when he gets bored with Isabella, she won't have a husband with a successful business to fall back on. She'll just have whatever's left of her trust fund and a lot of expensive habits she can't afford anymore." And with that cheerful thought, she walked away, leaving me sitting in a coffee shop with a flash drive full of evidence, and the sudden realization that Isabella's perfect plan had more holes than Swiss cheese. I finished my coffee and headed home, feeling like I'd just been handed the winning lottery ticket in a game I was supposed to lose. Isabella thought she was playing chess, while I stumbled around the board like a confused pawn. Time to show her what happened when pawns learned to think like queens. Walking back into Kessler's office 3 days later was like returning to a crime scene. Except this time, I wasn't the victim. I was the guy with the smoking gun and a really bad attitude about being underestimated. The same marble floors, the same overpriced art hanging on the walls like trophies from legal battles past. But everything felt different now. The intimidation factor had worn off faster than cheap cologne, replaced by the kind of confidence that comes from holding all the cards in a game your opponent thought they'd rigged. The receptionist, same blonde, same practiced smile, same attitude that suggested I might be lost and looking for the Subway sandwich shop downstairs, gave me the same once-over as before. But this time, I wasn't the confused, heartbroken husband stumbling around in shock. I was Marcus Hale, successful businessman, holder of evidence, and general pain in the ass for people who thought they could screw me over without consequences. "Mr. Hale," she chirped, her voice hitting that perfect note of professional fake friendliness. "Mr. Kessler is expecting you." Damn right he was expecting me. I called his office that morning and told his secretary I needed an emergency meeting to clarify some details about my wife's case. What I hadn't mentioned was that those details included evidence of adultery, financial fraud, and enough documented lies to make a politician blush. The walk down that hallway felt completely different this time. Instead of feeling like a death march, it felt like a victory lap I hadn't finished running yet. Those awards and diplomas on the walls, still impressive, but not nearly as intimidating when you're carrying enough evidence to turn a feared attorney into a nervous wreck. Kessler's corner office still looked like something out of Architectural Digest, how to spend obscene amounts of money on furniture issue. But the man himself looked like he'd aged about 10 years since our last meeting. His usually perfect silver hair was slightly mussed, his expensive suit was wrinkled around the edges, and he had the kind of tired eyes that come from realizing you've bet on the wrong horse in a race you thought was fixed. "Marcus," he said, standing up from behind his aircraft carrier-sized desk. "Please sit down. Can I offer you something to drink?" "Coffee, water, something stronger." Something stronger sounded tempting, but I needed my head clear for this conversation. "Coffee is fine, thanks." He buzzed his secretary and ordered coffee like he was stalling for time, which he probably was. Smart lawyers always try to control the pace of difficult conversations, but I learned a thing or two about negotiations during my years in the shipping business. Sometimes the best strategy is to let the other guy sweat while you figure out exactly how deep a hole they've dug for themselves. I sat down in the same chair I had occupied 3 days ago. Except this time, I wasn't here to be intimidated or pushed around. This time, I was here to drop a legal bomb that would make Hiroshima look like a backyard barbecue. "So, Kessler said, settling back into his leather throne and trying to project the kind of confidence that had probably worked on every other terrified spouse who'd sat in this chair. I've had a chance to review your wife's initial filing. She's asking for a straightforward division of assets plus reasonable spousal support while she transitions to independent living. Reasonable spousal support. That was a good one. Like funding someone's affair and then paying them to continue not being married to you was somehow reasonable. Straightforward, I repeated, pulling out the folder I'd prepared. That's an interesting word choice, Harold. Mind if I call you Harold? We're practically old friends at this point. His smile faltered slightly, like a car engine that's not quite firing on all cylinders. Of course. What do you have there? I placed our prenuptial agreement on his desk, opened to the page I'd highlighted in bright yellow, like a legal marker of doom. Just some light reading. Thought you might want to refresh your memory about the terms of our marriage. Kessler's eyes moved across the page, and I watched his face go through several interesting color changes. Confident tan to worried pale to holy shit white. All in the span of about 30 seconds. His hands, those same steady lawyer hands that had probably signed million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, started trembling like leaves in a hurricane. This he started, then stopped, reading the clause again like he was hoping the words might change if he stared at them hard enough. This changes everything. Actually, it doesn't change anything, I said, keeping my voice as calm as a yoga instructor on Valium. It just confirms what's been true all along. I reached into my folder again and pulled out Chloe's flash drive, placing it next to the prenup like I was laying out evidence at a trial. 6 months of emails, text messages and photos documenting my wife's relationship with Brandon Morrison. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, jewelry purchases, all paid for with our joint accounts while she was planning to take me for half of everything I've worked for. Kessler stared at the flash drive like it was a snake that might bite him. Where did you get this? Let's just say not everyone in Brandon's office thinks adultery is a spectator sport, I replied. The important thing is that it's all legitimate evidence of infidelity, which, according to the prenup your client insisted on, makes this divorce a very different conversation than the one you thought you were having. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on his ridiculously expensive desk. Harold, I'm going to explain something to you, and I want you to listen carefully because I'm only going to say this once. My wife didn't hire you because you're good at family law. She hired you because she thought your reputation would scare me into rolling over and accepting whatever scraps you decided to throw my way. Kessler's Adam's apple bobbed like a fishing lure. Mr. Hale, I think there might be some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I interrupted, is Isabella's belief that I'd be too intimidated to fight back. She told Brandon I was just some grateful blue-collar guy who'd sign whatever papers you put in front of me. She actually said I'd probably thank her for the privilege of being divorced by someone as classy as Isabella Thornton. I pulled out my phone and played one of the voicemails from Isabella's secret device. Brandon's voice filled the office like audio evidence of stupidity. Baby Kessler's going to eat that husband of yours alive. Guy like that doesn't know how to fight people like us. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a chainsaw. Kessler looked like he was trying to solve a math problem that kept changing every time he thought he had the answer. People like us, I repeated, savoring the words. Funny thing about that phrase, Harold. Brandon seems to think that being born rich makes him smarter than people who actually work for a living. Isabella apparently agrees. They both seem to believe that I'm too stupid and too grateful to notice when I'm being screwed over. I stood up, straightening my tie and picking up my folder. Here's what's going to happen next. You're going to call my wife and explain that her little affair just became very expensive. You're going to tell her that the prenup she insisted on is about to cost her everything she thought she was going to steal from me. And you're going to recommend that she find herself a different lawyer, because you and I both know you don't want to go to court against me again." Kessler's face had gone from white to green like he was seasick on dry land. "Mr. Hale, perhaps we could discuss a settlement that works for everyone." "Everyone," I laughed, and it came out harsher than I'd intended. "Harold, the only person who needs to worry about a settlement is your client. I'm not the one who broke our marriage vows. I'm not the one who's been living a secret life funded by joint accounts. And I'm definitely not the one who's about to discover that adultery clauses aren't just decorative elements in prenuptial agreements." I headed toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Kessler was still sitting there looking like he'd been hit by a truck carrying bad news and worse legal strategies. "Oh, and Harold, next time Isabella calls to brag about how easy this is going to be, you might want to remind her that the last time we met in a legal setting, you ended up explaining to your client why they owed me a 7-figure settlement instead of the other way around." I walked out of that office feeling like I'd just won the lottery, solved world hunger, and discovered the secret to eternal youth all in the same afternoon. The elevator ride down was pure satisfaction. 32 floors of watching floor numbers decrease while my confidence went through the roof. The receptionist watched me leave with obvious confusion. People didn't usually exit meetings with Harold Kessler looking like they'd just been handed the keys to the kingdom. Most of his clients left looking like they'd been mugged by the legal system and then charged for the privilege. Outside, Boston was doing its usual thing, honking cars, rushing pedestrians, and street vendors selling questionable meat products to tourists who didn't know any better. But for the first time since Isabella's nuclear phone call, I felt like I was part of the world again, instead of just watching it happen to other people. Isabella had made her second major mistake. First, she'd forgotten about the prenup clause she'd insisted on. Now she'd hired a lawyer who already knew exactly what I was capable of when someone tried to back me into a corner. I pulled out my phone and called Leo. "Change of plans again. Set up a meeting with our family law attorney for tomorrow morning. Tell them it's urgent, and we'll need to discuss prenuptial agreements and evidence documentation." "Boss, you're starting to sound like one of those legal thriller movies. Should I be worried?" "Only if you're planning to cheat on your hypothetical future wife, Leo. Otherwise, you're golden." Isabella thought she'd been playing three-dimensional chess while I fumbled around with checkers. Turns out, I'd been setting up the board for a game she didn't even know existed. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a conference room that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought intimidation was an interior design style. The table was so polished you could perform surgery on it. And the windows offered a view of Boston Harbor that probably added another 0 to the hourly legal rate. Isabella walked in 10 minutes late because of course she did. She looked exactly like she always did when she wanted to remind the world that she was Isabella Thornon. Designer dress that probably cost more than my first apartment's rent. Heels that could double as weapons, and enough jewelry to fund a small revolution. She sat down across from me like she was settling into a throne, all smooth confidence and practiced superiority. Her new lawyer, some guy she'd hired after Kessler mysteriously developed scheduling conflicts, sat beside her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Marcus," she said, her voice dripping with syrupy sweetness. "You look well. Divorce suits you." I didn't respond. Sometimes silence is the best weapon against someone who's used to controlling conversations through manipulation. "Let's keep this simple," she continued, sliding a folder across the table. "You'll keep the apartment. It's not really my style anymore anyway. I'll take the business assets and investment accounts. You'll receive a reasonable settlement to help you transition." Transition like I was some charity case who needed her generous help to figure out how to live without her magnificent presence. The audacity was breathtaking. She was sitting there, fresh from months of affair-runded luxury, trying to divide up assets like she'd contributed anything more than expensive taste and an impressive ability to spend money she hadn't earned. I opened my folder and pulled out the prenup, placing it on the table like a legal grenade with the pin already pulled. Her confident smile flickered for just a second. "Remember this?" I asked conversationally. "The prenup you insisted on to protect your family's assets from fortune hunters?" I placed the evidence file next to the prenup. Photos, receipts, text messages, and Brandon Morrison's name highlighted in bright yellow across the top like a neon sign advertising stupidity. The change in Isabella's face was instant and beautiful. Confident superiority melted into panic mixed with nausea. Her lawyer examined the documents, his expression going from professional boredom to, "Holy shit, we're screwed," in 10 seconds. Section 12, subsection C. I said, flipping to the highlighted page. "The infidelity clause. Your idea, remember? Something about making sure we both stayed honest." I found 6 months of documented adultery. I continued, my voice staying calm while hers started climbing toward hysteria. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, text messages, planning dates around my business trips. All paid for with our joint accounts while you plan to take half of everything I've built. Her lawyer was frantically flipping through evidence, his face getting paler with each page. He could probably see his reputation taking a nosedive if this case went to court. "The prenup is very clear about adultery," I said, enjoying every second of watching Isabella's world crumble. "The faithful spouse receives half of all business assets, plus significant financial penalties for the cheating party." Isabella finally found her voice, strangled and desperate. "You can't prove anything." "Those could be fabricated." I pulled out Brandon's business card and placed it next to their photos. Brandon Morrison, Morrison Restaurant Group. The same Brandon Morrison whose voicemails are on your secret phone talking about celebrating my downfall over expensive dinners. Her lawyer closed the evidence file like he'd been asked to defend gravity. "Mrs. Hale, perhaps we should consider alternative approaches." "Alternative approaches?" "Lawyer speak for your client is screwed." "Here's what's going to happen," I said, standing up. "You're going to drop this ridiculous settlement demand. You're going to acknowledge that you violated our prenuptial agreement, and you're going to accept whatever terms I decide are fair." Isabella's mask finally slipped completely. "You bastard! I gave you 13 years of my life." "No," I replied, gathering my documents. "You gave me 13 years of lies while planning your exit strategy with another man." Walking out felt like emerging from a cave into sunlight. Isabella had finally seen my hand, and it was a royal flush in a game where she'd been bluffing with nothing. The next 6 weeks turned into a masterclass in watching someone's perfect plan collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. Isabella had gone from confident queen bee to desperate damage control, and it was almost enough to make me feel sorry for her. Almost. Her new lawyer, the third one she'd hired after the first 2 mysteriously developed ethical concerns about representing someone caught red-handed, was doing his best to salvage what was left of her case. But trying to defend Isabella at this point was like trying to explain why the Titanic was actually a successful voyage. Because, hey, at least some people survived. The court filings became a tennis match of legal documents. Isabella's team would submit some desperate motion claiming the evidence was inadmissible, and my attorney would respond by pointing out that secret phones, hotel receipts, and documented financial transfers weren't exactly ambiguous. They'd argue that the prenup was too harsh, and we'd counter by reminding everyone that Isabella had insisted on every single word of that infidelity clause. Asset valuations were particularly fun. My business, which Isabella had always dismissed as just a trucking company, turned out to be worth considerably more than her trust fund contributions to our marriage. 13 years of building something from nothing, while she attended yoga classes and charity lunches, had apparently paid off better than either of us realized. But the real entertainment came from watching Isabella try every trick in the book to avoid accepting reality. First, she tried denial, claiming the evidence was fabricated. The photos were doctored, and Brandon was just a friend who happened to share hotel rooms with her for purely platonic reasons. When that didn't work, she moved on to bargaining, offering to give up her claim to spousal support if I'd ignore the prenup violations. Then came the anger phase, which was honestly my favorite part of this whole shit show. Isabella showed up at my office one afternoon, marching past Leo like she still owned the place, and proceeded to scream at me for 20 minutes about how I was being unreasonable, vindictive, and cruel. Apparently, holding her accountable for breaking our marriage vows made me the villain in this story. "You're destroying my life, Marcus," she shouted, pacing around my office like a caged animal. "I made one mistake. One mistake." 6 months of documented adultery was apparently just a minor oopsie in Isabella's world. "You're right," I said calmly, not looking up from my shipping manifests. "You made one mistake. You forgot to read the prenup before you decided to cheat." The desperation phase was almost sad to watch. Isabella tried everything from showing up at my apartment with tears and apologies to sending mutual friends to convince me I was being too harsh. She even attempted to seduce me back into the marriage during one particularly pathetic evening, showing up in the black dress I used to love and pretending the last 6 months had been some kind of temporary insanity. But here's the thing about trust. Once it's broken, it doesn't magically fix itself just because someone puts on a pretty dress and says they're sorry. The final settlement negotiations took place in late autumn, with lawyers shuffling papers, while Isabella sat there looking like she'd aged 10 years and 2 months. The prenup held up like a fortress. The evidence was airtight, and her team had run out of legal Hail Marys. When we signed the papers, Isabella looked at me with pure hatred burning in her eyes. Not sadness, not regret, not even disappointment. Just rage at being outplayed by someone she'd underestimated from day one. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice cold enough to freeze hell. "I'm getting there," I replied, signing my name with a flourish that felt like closing the book on the worst chapter of my life. She left with a fraction of what she'd planned to take. No spousal support, and a legal bill that probably cost more than most people's houses. Brandon Morrison, her knight in shining armor, had mysteriously lost interest once he realized their romance came with a 7-figure price tag. Funny how quickly love dies when it gets expensive. 1 year later, I stood in my new corner office on the 20th floor of a downtown Boston high-rise, looking out at the harbor where cargo ships moved like floating metal mountains, carrying dreams and commerce from around the world. The view was pretty spectacular, but the best part wasn't the scenery. It was the fact that everything I could see belonged to me, built by me, and earned through something Isabella had never understood: actual work. Hill Logistics had grown into something I'd never imagined when I was changing oil filters and dreaming about being my own boss. 23 employees now, a fleet of trucks that looked professional instead of desperate, and contracts with shipping companies that used to ignore my phone calls. The settlement money from Isabella's spectacularly failed divorce attempt had provided the capital to expand faster than I'd ever thought possible. Ironic how her betrayal had funded my biggest success. The office itself was a statement. Not the kind of gaudy display of wealth that screamed, "I'm insecure about my bank account," but the kind of understated success that whispered, "I belong here, and I earned every square foot of it." The furniture was quality, without being pretentious. The art was actually art instead of abstract nonsense. And my desk, while impressive, didn't require its own zip code like some legal shark's monument to intimidation. Leo knocked on my door carrying a stack of contracts and wearing the kind of grin that meant either really good news or really entertaining gossip. "Boss, you're going to love this. Just got off the phone with Henderson Shipping. They want to sign an exclusive 3-year deal. Apparently, word's gotten around about our reliability. And I could tell there was more coming, and I may have accidentally overheard some interesting news about a certain ex-wife and her restaurant-investing boyfriend." Leo's grin got wider. Seems like their little romance hit some financial turbulence. I leaned back in my chair, which was comfortable enough to nap in, but professional enough for client meetings. "Do tell." Brandon Morrison's restaurant empire apparently wasn't as solid as he pretended. 3 of his establishments closed last month, and word is he's having cash flow problems. Turns out talking a big game about money and actually having money are 2 different things. The Schadenfreude was delicious. Brandon had spent months bragging about how he'd upgrade Isabella from blue-collar trash to high-society success, and now he was struggling to keep his own businesses afloat. Meanwhile, the mechanic he'd dismissed was sitting in a corner office planning the next phase of expansion. "Gets better," Leo continued, clearly enjoying his role as bearer of excellent gossip. "Isabella's been seen around town looking for a job. Apparently, her trust fund wasn't as unlimited as she thought, and her legal fees from the divorce ate up most of what was left." A job. Isabella Thornton looking for actual employment, like a regular person who had to work for money instead of just inheriting it or stealing it from their soon-to-be ex-husband. The woman who used to spend more on a single dinner than most people made in a week was apparently discovering what the rest of us call reality. "Any word on what kind of job?" I asked because sometimes you just have to know how far the mighty have fallen. "Retail, some boutique in Back Bay, probably spending her days helping other rich women buy overpriced clothes while trying to pretend she's not bitter about how her life turned out." The poetic justice was almost too perfect. Isabella, who had looked down on regular jobs and ordinary people, was now working retail, while I was running board meetings and signing expansion deals. She traded a successful husband for a failing restaurant investor and a minimum wage job selling designer clothes to women who probably reminded her of who she used to be. My phone buzzed with a text from my attorney. "Quarterly payment from Isabella received on time and in full. Prenup enforcement continues to work perfectly. Even better, not only had Isabella lost the financial security she tried to steal from me, but she was now legally obligated to pay me monthly penalties for her adultery. Every month, she had to write a check acknowledging that cheating on me had been the most expensive mistake of her life." I walked to the window and watched the harbor, where ships came and went, carrying cargo to destinations around the world. Some of those ships were working with my company now, moving goods because clients trusted Marcus Hale to get things done right and on time. When I'd been a mechanic, I used to dream about having an office with a view. Now I had the office, the view, and something even better. The knowledge that I'd built it all without stepping on anyone or betraying anyone's trust. I'd won by being better, not by being worse. Isabella had tried to break me, reduce me to some grateful peasant who'd accept whatever scraps she decided to leave behind. Instead, she'd forced me to discover exactly how strong I really was when someone pushed me too far. The irony was beautiful. The prenup she'd used to protect herself from my supposed weaknesses had become the weapon that destroyed her. The man she'd thought was too weak to fight back had turned into her worst nightmare. And the best part, I was just getting started.